Soul Night Live, number 38. Tonight, my guest is Charles Snider from Strawberry Bricks. He's written a new book about progressive rock, and it's actually the third edition of it that he's done, and it's updated and expanded. So we're going to talk about the history of prog here in a few minutes. Thank you all for dropping by tonight. Wow, I thought I had a lot of records.
Here I am.
Hey, Charles, how are you?
I'm doing great, Sean. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for coming on here tonight and
Absolutely.
talking about the book and this music that we all love
Love,
so much.
love.
Yeah, I have to say that some music, in general, I think music has the power to make your life better, and has the power to inspire you. And this music is definitely very inspiring. And
Absolutely. I mean, you know, at some point we all hear music for the first time and it excites us. And it just, it's music is the one thing it can move you, right? You can't see it, can't feel it, but it moves you. And, being a kid and hearing Roundabout or a Beatles song or whatever it was, you hear those for the first time and just leaves a mark on the brain.
yeah, it sure does. Do you remember the first time that you?
It was probably Beatles. So I have sisters that are a few years older than me. My mom was also musical, right? Studied voice, piano. So we always had music in our house. And at Paperback Writer Rain, that 45 was, I can just remember playing one side, flipping it, playing it again, hearing the bass, those the loud mix, right? I mean, that was it was a hot mix. I think it was, EMI or Abbey Road EMI Studios back then. It was a hot mix, and it was just, you're just like, oh, wow, I can't believe this. So I think that was, I don't know how old I was, very young, but and then Fragile's, kind of the first, I like that record.
Okay. Well, I remember hearing Roundabout on the radio,
Yeah.
before I even thought about anything, and I didn't really get a hold of it and go, oh, this is a Yes album until, I don't know, maybe I was 14 or so, and I was over at a friend's house who was a little older than me and had a great record collection and was in a band. And I just started kind of digging through them, and it's just the cover art kind of tied them all together, and that kind of caught my eye in the first place. I always kind of like bands where there's a kind of a thematic thing that goes on with the art that ties the albums together. So I could kind of tell that these kind of were akin to each other right away, just digging through the piles. And I put on Fragile, and just immediately it's like, oh, of course I've heard this on the radio. I didn't know who it was, but oh, that was Yes. Okay, cool. And I was really getting into bass at the time. I never really paid a lot of attention to it until about then. And I had a friend that was a bass player, and suddenly it's like, oh, what records does it really stand out on? And of course, Yes, it's very high in the mix. And I think it's one of the reasons my friend suggested it. So for the first year or two, I think I was just a big Chris Squire fanboy. I didn't really seriously try to play guitar until after that. And of course, then I fell in love with Steve's playing. And Trevor's as well, but and Peter Banks is not to be underestimated. He doesn't get mentioned nearly enough. He was the first Yes guitarist.
And absolutely. In fact, I'll just say those first two Yes albums, I don't think they get mentioned enough. And
they don't, and they're amazing.
I listen to them all. Like that's the Yes that I listen to are those first two albums. They're punky, they're raw, they're energetic. I mean, there's so much more there than I think people give it credit to. But I mean, that's a happening band.
Absolutely. Well, I think some people think, oh, they're just kind of hippie psychedelic. There's a dash of that in there, but it's really this raw beast of a sound. Chris's bass has got this fuzz on it almost all the time. It got a lot cleaner later. And Peter just had this kind of slash and burn, Pete Townsend kind of go for it attitude that, and then other times he was jazzy and very eloquent. So he had a lot of sides to his playing. There was two sides to Peter Banks playing.
Absolutely. Two sides of Peter Banks.
That's
but
right.
The one thing also not to miss, Tony Kaye. and the
Oh yeah.
Hammond organ. I mean, that's like, guys, if anyone out there is a keyboardist and you want to hear a classic Hammond tone, just go get those first two Yes albums, turn them up, because they sound
Oh,
fantastic.
I was talking with Jeff Downs a couple days ago
Yep.
about this, and I said, the thing about it was that it was so edgy, it was distorted, and Leslie was cranked up, and Chris was like, get that sound, Jeff. When Drama came around, and you can almost kind of hear a kind of a connection between Drama and the Yes album, the way the keyboards kind of interact with the band, and yeah, he just had this scrank kind of sound, that
Yeah.
Wakeman didn't go for that. He went for something a lot more clean, I guess, for lack. He's just more the typical Hammond without any dirt or anything. But
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
that early
definitely.
Yes, man.
Yeah, K was, that's dirty organ. I mean, that's down, and that's some good stuff. So
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think that's where early progressive rock keyboard wizardry and all, it was the organ, it was the Hammond.
absolutely.
These other things came along a few years later, and became part and parcel to the palette that everybody used. But, those first, late 60s, early 70s, it's just Hammond and Mellotron.
Yeah,
And the Mellotron's
absolutely.
another ball of wax that we'll
Well,
discuss here before
we'll
long.
we'll definitely get there.
Yeah, definitely.
I got a good album for Mellotron.
Yeah, I bet you do. I bet there's quite a few. So, what inspired you to write the first edition of this? When did you do it? And
So a long time ago, there was back in the online world of Prodigy, there was a prog board,
okay,
and
what year was this? Would you say?
90, 89, 90, something like
Wow.
that, right?
Okay.
So there was these were the first, like, AOL, CompuServe, Prodigy were like, you'd get a disc, right, in a magazine or something, plug it in, dial up the number, right? It's like, oh, I need another phone line because my phone, because I'm always online,
Right.
and
Pick up the phone. It's
nobody
like,
remembers that now. Nobody remembers that now, but Prodigy had a prog board, and there was a couple of guys there that we started. It was a lively progressive rock discussion, and I got the idea. I think it was Roy that said, hey, a timeline is a really great way of introducing this, or kind of looking at the music. And I created a poster, right? 18 by 24 poster that kind of had bands, years, and mapped them all out. And it was a neat perspective because you could kind of see who was doing what when, like Close to the Edge, Foxtrot came out the same time.
mm-hmm.
So, it's kind of interesting to see where Yes was on their progression, where Genesis was in their progression. So I registered the website, and then, started doing it online. And then in the early 2000s, birth of my first daughter, I had a little bit of time off. So I put it together as a book. And we're now 13 years later, we're on the third edition. It's a very thick book. There are no pictures. It is all words, 525 album reviews, thousands of albums mentioned. It's been a great journey. I mean, I'm a computer guy. I'm a little OCD. I love this music, and I like to kind of look at a band at its beginning, its middle, see how, I mean, the thing about a lot of this era, right? So is that it's connected, right? There's so many guys that are in, you look at a guy like Tony Reeves, was in Coliseum. He was in Greenslade. He played for Curved Air. It's not necessarily coincidence, right? I mean, these guys were connected. And when, you start following all those connections, like, okay, well, I'm at this band, and how do I get to this band? That's kind of why, I thought, like, well, this really is a book. The other thing is Trouser Press Record Guide. So if Ira Robbins had Trouser Press magazine. He put out some record guides, late 80s. I think they first came out. Definite huge inspiration. I found those. He deals with kind of new wave, right? So kind of the next generation, the generation after the progressives.
Hmm.
His books deal with that, but I love the format, and I thought, yeah, I can do that. Let's get that done for progressive rock. So
Okay.
we got it done.
Yeah, you did. And now you've updated it, going on 15 years later.
Yep.
Now, where did it stop timeline wise on the first book?
First book I think was The Wall.
Okay, so it stops about 1980.
Yeah,
Okay.
1980. It was kind of a
Now,
hard stop, and
yeah.
that's one that I definitely started thinking about. Like, is that a real natural ending? I mean, the wall falls down, strawberry bricks, right?
Oh,
And
right,
um,
forever.
but then I started thinking about it, and I just kind of like, I really wanted to push it a little bit later to Asia, and we'll get there and talk about Asia, but I think that's kind of for the generation that invented progressive rock. That's a little more fitting close of the chapter, shall we say?
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to stop this evening too. It's like I'll just have you back on, some other time in the next few months, and we can pick up at
Yeah,
1980 and go forward to
yeah,
now.
good.
So,
So,
because
so
there's
I got
awfully
an
good stuff.
essential list. So I use the word essential. I thought about that word a lot.
Hmm.
Greatest, best. Especially on Facebook, everyone's like, Steve Hackett is the best, or Rick Wakeman is the greatest.
I know, and you just want to laugh every time you see somebody that's that devoutly, behind anyone. It's like, yeah, we get it, but it's that's just your opinion, man.
I mean, and if the thing is, there are no really any wrong answers, and I
No,
guess
there
that's
aren't.
the point. There's no wrong answers, but I use the word essential because when I think about it, it's like, all right, if you didn't know anything about progressive rock, here's I got a list of 67 that you can listen to, and you'll get a good overview. Not only stylistically, but also kind of it'll arc the whole era, and that's really what I thought about when I thought about what albums to put in this essential list is. How do you get from the beginning? How do you get to the end? And what's going to take you, what's going to cover the most ground in between? So
Okay.
with that.
Now, a couple questions
Uh-huh.
first about the term. Like, where do you think it first came along? When you got online in 1989, were you already calling it prog?
I think Prague was around. So the poster, I call it art rock, progressive art rock. And as a teen growing up in the 70s, I don't really remember too much of the prog. I remember calling it art rock, but very much so it was British music. And it's I think that's kind of a really important thing, is that in the 70s you had people that liked American music, you had people that liked British music, and you know I think that's where the art rock thing came. Is that you know the Beatles kind of started everything, in a lot of
Sure.
ways. Beach Boys are just as valid. Frank Zappa is just as valid, but in England, the Beatles were really something, right? Like when we think about this whole concept of progression, we go from Love Me Do to Tomorrow Never Knows, and they covered a lot of ground in
Yeah,
between.
how many years was that? Like 4 years, maybe?
Yeah, like 4 or 5, right? Not that many.
Between, it's amazing what a couple joints and some acid will do for you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say a little bit of acid and
We
phew.
don't suggest that, by the
No,
way.
don't. Drugs are
No,
bad,
no, no.
right?
We're all too old for that shit anyway,
Drink
right?
water. Fizzy water is the best.
That's right. Dr. Pepper is a great embalming fluid. I'm getting a head start.
Yeah, fizzy water is good. Um, so yeah,
Okay, well, I guess just a quick, the big $1,000 question is, what is Prague? And online that question is greeted with, not again,
yeah, right.
because like I said, it's a slippery thing. It can be described a lot of different ways. Now, and here's how I would describe it. You tell me if you agree. Um, it's music that was made in the 70s without any commercial concerns. It was, they weren't trying to get a hit on FM radio. They were just creating art. And a lot of it was inspired by classical music and some of it by jazz. And it was just a way of thinking bigger than your typical pop song on the radio.
Absolutely, right? I mean, it grew out of the the psychedelic movement of, it's a pretty brief period in time, 66, 68.
Yeah, well, that just kind of opened it
Opened
up.
the
It's like
gates.
suddenly it's like anything goes.
Anything goes.
The only limit now is your imagination. So
Exactly.
put it down and record it. And out of that came these amazing bands and this amazing genre, I think,
Exactly.
it
And it
really,
really is that imagination that, like, let's let our creativity. And, the other thing to think about too is these guys were all young. They were in their teens and 20s.
sure.
Like when you look at, the first, 69 to 74, there weren't very many 30-year-olds. I don't know, maybe David Allen was a 30-year-old,
That's a
right?
good point. Yeah.
But
Right.
all of them, I mean, statistically, I had a database of all the musicians from the website, and these guys were all born median age, year of birth is 1947, plus or minus, and the standard deviation of 1 is 3 years. So that's 1944 to 1950. And, that's pretty tight generation, right? That, you take all the classic albums and you look at all the musicians, they're almost all going to fall in those years. And, so they experienced kind of the same thing, right? They heard the Beatles for the first time and they got excited by the Beatles, and, they went to swing in, London and bought, crazy clothes and, smoked their first joint or whatever. And then when they started recording the albums, their imagination was the limit. And there really weren't, the record industry was, young, right? At that time. And it's, they took a band like Yes and they said, okay, here you go. Here's a 3-album deal. And,
Right.
And then you had that progression, the first album to the second, the big jump to the third.
Yeah. It's
And
almost like they didn't expect you
success.
to be amazing right out of the gate. They would nurture you, and over the course of 3 albums, hopefully they'll get that one they want in the first place.
Yeah. And, the other thing is, I think bands were not afraid. I think this is a really important point. I don't think bands were afraid to change their style and change their music. Now I think, one critique I would have of a lot of modern bands is I don't want to say they're one-trick ponies, but, they find something that they're good at and they stay there. And it's almost, you can get a little uncomfortable with that, right? Or you get a little too comfortable with
Well,
it.
after 3 or 4 albums, it becomes really obvious. And it's kind
Right.
of like, are these it's like you've got 10 cards in your deck and every album is just a reshuffling of them.
Yeah,
And there's
exactly.
some modern prog icons that are guilty of that to some degree as well, but we won't get into them
Yeah,
tonight.
yeah. We're talking positive because
Right,
one
exactly.
thing about the book, it's positive. Like,
Yeah.
there are no bad reviews. There's no, I got my favorites and I got things that I don't like as much, but there's nothing negative in there. It's a positive, like Team Prague, like we're all in, we find the good in everything. Everything is weighted equally.
I think
Um,
that's good because, it's a diverse landscape, and and you get online, it might seem like there are different factions of it, and I suppose there are, but at the end of the day, like I said, we're all kind of floating on this little tiny raft in the middle of a sea of mediocrity. Let's
yeah,
not, let's not take sides amongst that. Let's just kind of love the fact that we're all loving this amazing music, and
exactly. And
for
there's a lot of negative online, which, we get the internet balls and all that kind of stuff, but better to be positive, especially in the year 2020. Let's look for
absolutely,
positive because
absolutely,
we need positive.
that's right. Well, for starters, before we get going,
Uh-huh.
tell folks where they can get the book at.
Amazon.
Amazon.
So if
So
you
you have
live
to go to
in
South America and hack your way with a machete through the jungle to get this. Oh,
Amazon,
not that Amazon. Okay.
Amazon. So if you're in Germany, amazon.de. If you're in the UK, amazon.co.uk. If you're in France, amazon.fr. If you're in Japan, amazon.co.jp, right?
Mhm.
It's print on demand. So, They have a fancy machine that prints books one at a time. So when you order it, it just gets printed, shipped. It's going to be prime shipping to, you know, your country. So if you're in Canada and you're a Prime member, I know Amazon, but it's print on demand. So it's probably the
It's
most
awesome.
economical
No,
way to do it.
that's really well made for print on
It's
demand.
it's a fantastically well made
Yeah,
book.
this you would never know.
No,
And
not
that's
at all.
great. You don't have to worry about printing up thousands and trying to move them. You just kind of,
Having a garage full of
it's
books.
great.
I've done that with
You
record
know,
labels, you know. I still got boxes of CDs, and it's like, I don't know. One day I'll get rid of them.
it's a
But
great way to go
the other
about
thing
it,
is, I
though.
also like to point out Matt Howarth's cover art. It's
Yeah, I was
fantastic.
wondering who did this.
Yeah. So Matt, you know, is a kind of famous comic book guy. He's done albums with Quark Space, Conrad Schnitzler. Um, but he revised this from the first edition.
Hmm.
So there's a few new elements here. You know, if you got both editions, see if you can figure out what they are. There's 4, I can tell you that. Took me a while to find the last one, but
Yeah, and you've got your cover art alludes to a lot of famous bands here.
absolutely.
Point out a few here. For starters, is this how progressive is this ear?
Yep.
Pretty progressive, all right.
Or
Okay,
wait, got Krautrock, right?
sweet.
So
So
yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
we got Yes here with the
yep.
floating mountains and
Steve Hillage with the salmon.
fish. Okay, Gong, the flying teapot.
Yep.
Um, Pigs on the Wing.
Or it's also Caravan,
Okay.
right? Love to love you and pigs will fly tonight.
Oh, there you go. Octopus. I would assume that's a Gentle
Yep.
Giant reference.
Yep.
Um,
Genesis,
yeah.
right? The Watcher. And
Uh,
then,
do I see magma here someplace?
yeah,
There's
Magma's,
magma kind of hiding back behind
yeah,
there.
Magma's hiding there.
Behind the volcano erupting.
Yep.
That's appropriate.
And then Atomic Rooster.
Right here. Okay.
And then Nectar is up here. Fly.
Okay. And what about these jets bombing things? Are they from anything in
That's
particular?
Captain Lockheed and the Starfighters. So Rob Calvert of Hawkwind.
Okay. Very cool.
Yep.
And how about
Centipede.
that guy here? Yeah.
Centipede we got.
And this is the green slade guy over
Yep.
here, the little
Green Slade. Yep.
monk guy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think it's great. It's very, very eye-catching, you know, and I think it suits the music because the music is very colorful as well.
He did a great job. I mean, just thank you, Matt. You know, like, got to put a plug.
Yeah,
He
kudos,
also
man.
wrote a fiction novel kind of based on the music in here. And if you have the book, I mean, there's a link on the website, right? So strawberrybricks.com shows you where to get everything.
Okay, excellent. All righty. So we're going to start at the beginning. It's just a chronological look. Let me see if I can get screen sharing going on
Okay.
here. Bear with me for a second. So are you ready to share?
Ready?
Well, yeah, you got it here. Okay.
You got it?
Yeah, it looks good. All right. So
So,
this is the book
yep,
that
the
we've been
book,
talking about.
some nice quotes for some nice people.
Yeah, Leonardo, he knows his Prague.
He knows his Prague. Mike Barnes, he knows his Prague. And
Hugh
Hugh
Banton.
Banton knows his Prague.
Yeah, he made a little bit. Hugh Banton's feet alone should win an Oscar. You know,
Absolutely.
just watching him work those bass pedals while he's playing in Vandergraaf is amazing.
Yeah. So we'll start with record number 1.
This is where it all started, huh?
It's
Okay.
kind of where, you know, the Beatles kind of, you know, they were an important band, you know, like them, hate them. They were an important band. And I think everyone got this album and, you know, they kind of said, wow, we can up our game. And, you know, they printed the lyrics on the back. They put cutouts in. It's a gatefold. Musically, you know, unbelievable, right? So starts here. And number 1, right? June 67, across the globe, I guess, you know, was a number 1. And I think this one, people said, wow, we can do whatever we want. Our imagination is our boundary.
Yeah, this
So
is
from
really the
there,
one that kind of opened the floodgates, so to speak.
So we'll start there, but we're going to go. Our first album's going to be Keith Emerson,
Ah, very
right?
nice.
And the Nice, because, as we were speaking earlier, the Hammond organ, and, you know, here's Keith Emerson is your Jimi Hendrix of the organ. He really took that instrument and, you know, did everything with it. I don't think we can say enough about Keith.
No, not
Kind of
really.
sad he left us. It's very sad that he left us. I think he had some demons, but boy, in the day, he was the pioneer.
Yeah, he was. And it wasn't just about virtuistic chops, which he had bucket loads of, but his approach to harmony and composition was
Absolutely.
otherworldly. He is very much about using a lot of fourths and suspended kind of qualities that give that ELP music almost kind of terse edginess that just is uniquely his own. Well, probably not uniquely his own. There's definitely some classical composers he got some of those ideas from. But
Yeah, he
in
took
the
these.
world of progressive rock, nobody sounds like Keith. And if they do, you just go, oh, you like Keith.
Yeah, he sounds like Keith.
Right.
So it's a great place to start. I kind of like their first album the best. I like Davey List in there. I think he gives it a little element of, you know, a little element of surprise. I mean, he definitely, I think with the Nice, they kind of had one trick, and by the third album, it played out, and you can see, why Keith wanted to do something greater. But the other guys, they formed, eventually formed. They had some solo careers. All those albums are in the book too. I mean, all the albums from Brian Davison, that's all in the book. Refugees in the book. So, but you can see why he started with the Nice, and then you can also see why he went on to Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Do you
Because
feel like the Nice would kind of confined him a bit and he had more freedom once he got the ELP?
I think so. I think he also, let's also say that Greg Lake is a marvel, right? Carl Palmer is a marvel. Like he really, he went found the best two guys, and fortunately they had a band that stuck together for 10 years, and they had chemistry because those first till you get to Brain Salad Surgery. I mean, every album was a major step. Like they upped their game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you start with the Nice though, and then the other band kind of from this era, we're going to go to the Moody Blues. And I think in earlier versions of the book, I may have had their first album,
Mm-hmm.
but to me this album is really special, In Search of the Lost Chord.
Yeah.
um,
Well, this doesn't have an orchestra, and that's what kind of makes it all the more impressive because it sounds huge for a band their size. The Mellotron made a
I mean, my little
big difference.
soundboard is, if the Moody's debut was a little hoity-toity, I mean, it was a little hoity-toity, but it was wonderful. I mean, those two songs, Nights in White Satin, and then Tuesday Morning, those are radio, like you heard that on their AM radio, you heard it
Yeah.
on FM radio.
Well, it's interesting. They get thrown in as early progressive rock, and I think it's because of the symphonic angle. Because a lot of 70s progressive rock was rock bands trying to sound orchestral, and they did it right out of the gate. But the Mellotron was an important part of that. And in case y'all don't know what the Mellotron is, it was basically an early sampler. When you push a key, it would play a tape, and the tape lasted 8 seconds and then it stopped. So it kind of made everyone play it in a certain manner just because of the limitations of it. But out of it, they would sample string sections and brass, all the different orchestral sounds, and you could just bring them up at the touch of a button. The problem was it was very undependable. And I remember I talked to John Lodge a few months ago, and he said they're playing at the Fillmore East, and all the tape comes out of the back of the Mellotron like spaghetti. So they spent the rest of the night watching cartoons. They played cartoons on the big screen between sets and stuff. So yeah, and it's funny because the Mellotron is such an amazing sound that just you can't really be topped. But for the guys that had to deal with it, a lot of them were glad when the mid 70s came along and there was a suitable string sound that they could just, never have to deal with it again. The thing is, it was never quite as cool,
No.
and I think nowadays people our age and younger kind of lust for those sounds, while the pioneers are like, that thing was a pain in the ass. I've just got bad memories. But the sound is what really makes a difference and makes
Yeah,
it.
they definitely, there's a Mellotron website that, documents, like every serial number and who owns it, and,
Yeah.
big
So
community around that.
so
So
those were really the two big sounds keyboard wise in the early day. That was the palette. That was about it. You couldn't really get a good piano sound on stage this side of bringing a grand on and miking it up, and who could afford to do that? So the organ and the mellotron were really
mhm.
the basis of everything early on.
And, let's also remember with the Mellotron, the Beatles, were big, right?
Oh sure, Strawberry Fields and I Am the Walrus, the fluty sounds and
Definitely.
yeah,
They kind
absolutely.
of introduced that. So, okay, so the next album, we're going to go with some Procol Harum. So again, everyone knows Whiter Shade of Pale is a huge hit. But this album, Shine On Brightly, did one thing. It introduced us to the side long suite.
Oh, okay.
Right? So the second side of this album has, In Held 'Twas I. It's, technically I think there is a one song at the front, but it's your multi-part epic song, which, that kind of became like that was like the ultimate goal for the progressive musician of this era, is like, let's just compose a whole side of music.
Sure.
Hell, let's compose 2 albums worth of music, and they did it. But the first one, I believe, is here, and it's a good, it's a good piece of music. I mean, Procol Harum's a wonderful band, right? Matthew Fisher, right? He's a great organist.
Yeah,
Gary
Robin
Brooker's voice.
Trower. I mean, he's amazing.
Yeah, Trower.
Yeah.
Trower's a hero of mine. I love his guitar playing.
Super
So,
soulful.
so then we're gonna go to the first rock opera, because
Oh
again,
yeah, I've heard about this
right,
one.
SF Sorrows. So
Right.
Pretty Things are, I would say, probably one of the more underrated bands that came out of England of that era. They were, Dick Taylor was an early Rolling Stone member. They had a lot of hits, kind of in the early 60s. Then, this came out 68. I think it was actually recorded in 67, but it took forever for EMI to release it. But this was the original rock opera. And there's some fantastic songs on here. It's gotten a lot of, it's definitely moved on, I think, or I think it's risen in value. I mean, it didn't sell very well. It didn't chart or anything, but
What's the crux of the story that the concept's around?
I don't know. It's pretty close to Tommy. It's about, a lonely guy that, um, finds love, loses love, goes to the army, right? And it's a little oblique, right?
Hmm.
But first one. The problem is it was delayed in release. Pete Townsend released Tommy in the meantime. So then everyone thinks, oh, well, Tommy's the first rock opera, but actually SF Sorrow. And
Well,
and just a quick plug for their next album, Parachute. Wonderful album too.
at
Total
least
Lost, released on Rare Earth in the US, which, that was not a prog label. And I'm sure that the label had no idea what to do with the record. So,
yeah. Well, at
but
least
sadly, we lost Phil May, a couple months ago. He succumbed to, I think he had some lung problems, but we lost him. So it's a great album. Check it out.
yeah. I was just going to say, nobody can point to it and say, "Oh, Pete Townsend ripped their idea off," because it really wasn't even out. Or,
Right.
so it's just kind of interesting how they both were doing rock opera things around the same time. But yeah, I've heard about this one being the very first one, and it's noteworthy, because sometimes progressive rock is about scope of
Yep.
vision. You know, that's why things like a lot of Pink Floyd gets in there. It's like, you know, the parts aren't particularly tricky, but the scope of vision that put it all
Exactly.
together, you know, that's progressive.
And that's where we go back to Sergeant Pepper, right? Like the album. Let's make this, the thing that we want to create is we want to create this album. It's, more so than just the individual songs, right? Because,
Mhm.
up until then, it was, the album was, okay, we got a whole bunch of 45s. Let's put them on one side. And then let's just quick record some other songs to put on, to fill it up. And then we'll sell the long player.
Right. Just to stop and go, we're going to make these songs thematically go together was, you know, kind of a revelation at the time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody had to do it first.
So we're going to go to Coliseum for number 5. Coliseum, this basically lineup was John Mayall's Bluesbreakers, right? According, it says number 89 according to Pete Frame. But this is where you put most of that band: John Heisman, Dave Greenslade, right? Tony Reeves, Dick Hextall Smith. That's where they came together. And, this is British kind of jazz rock,
Right.
horns, fantastic stuff. Fantastic stuff. Definitely. I don't know how popular they were here in the States. I don't think they were very popular, but is the number 15 album, right? In 69. So it's a great record. Um, the next one
Those
we're going to
who are,
go to,
and that's called Those Are About to Die, We Salute You.
yeah,
So that's way before AC/DC had
yeah.
used a similar phrase.
All right, one of the greatest albums, like uh Stand Up, Jethro Tull. Love this album. I can't say enough good things about it.
Yeah, it was in my vinyl roundup tonight, as a matter of fact. So
Fantastic.
deja vu.
Yep. Number 1 album, right? So this is kind of the first commercial success, right? It was a number 1 in the UK, number 20 in the US. I'm a huge fan of early Jethro Tull. I think what they did is so original. Martin Barr, of course, comes aboard on this album, and I'm one of those guys. If it doesn't have Martin, it's not really Jethro Tull. But
Uh-huh.
there you go.
Take that, you Mick Abrams fanboys.
But Mick's a good guy too. Bloodwind Pig. Let's not forget that band. That's in the book as well. Mick's a great guitarist. A little more traditional, but
Yeah.
I don't think you could have. I don't think Tull could have done what they later did with Mick. So maybe
Oh,
that's
I
kind of
agree.
about
Yeah.
Martin.
Yeah.
But
Martin was a little more versatile.
yeah. So next, we're gonna go to one of my favorite albums,
Oh, I
Soft
love this
Machine
album
Volume
too.
2. These guys. Listen, Frank Zappa was a wonderful musician, but he had terrible lyrics. Soft Machine, just as good musicians, better lyrics.
Oh yeah. What's the the best known tune on here? I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's
Oh, I mean, there's the concise British alphabet I love. But they're I think Esther's nose job, right? Is kind of the
no,
one.
I
But
think it's
but
like
they definitely were
As He
doing
Lies Perfectly Still, something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, that's here.
Yeah, I love that.
They definitely did a lot of suites here, where they were composing and, speaking of keyboardists with a unique style, Mike Ratledge, he was he was always playing a note, like he was always changing, right? He wasn't really kind of a throw a chord down. I mean, his solos were just continuous, wonderful. But this is definitely an album that, you know, I I found, and it was just like, wow, it's so British. That's the one thing about anything with Robert Wyatt is that it just screams kind of Britishness. His voice, his the accented voice, um, lyrically fantastic. So a lot of fun, and this is of course part of the greater Canterbury scene, which is started with the Wildflowers in the early '60s. And then Soft Machine, Caravan, Gong kind of all come from that same
Sure.
tree.
And Soft Machine had a lot of phases too. Like this is a rather whimsical vocal album, and the next one is not. It is more jazz jamming epics.
Yeah.
And how did they change after that? Eventually, Holsworth came along, and it became
Actually, eventually they became Nucleus, I think, like all the guys that were in Ian Carr's Nucleus joined Soft Machine and kind of took the band over. But yeah, you had Alan Holdsworth was around, and then John Etheridge after that. Um, you know, great history, great band. A lot of people love this stuff. So this came out, let's see, September 69. Let's move forward. Here we are a month later, and we have arguably the first progressive rock album, right?
yeah,
In the court of the crimson mellotron,
that's
right?
right. Slightly out of tune, but it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is, everyone says about this album that, it blew them away because there's nothing, when you go back one day before this album was released, there's nothing even close to it.
No, I mean just the opening salvo of Schizoid Man just blows your hair back, and just the level of skill and precision was something new for rock, I think. And the rest of the album is it's not quite as over the top. It's very majestic and regal,
Mm-hmm.
I guess is how I'd put it. Lots of big washes of mellotron and pastoral stuff with flutes and um, but yeah, just and
And they get really, like they really get jazzy on Moonchild.
oh yeah,
Moonchild kind of drifts. It's got a pretty little song at the beginning, and then it kind of drifts into, you know, improvisation land. And
yeah,
Fripp sounds pretty darn good on that. It's not really, he kind of became known for, his heavy sustain. But here he's pretty smooth.
yeah. He has a a really analytical side to his playing, but there's also a really heartfelt side that surfaces from time to time, and I think it was more on display early on
Mm-hmm.
these early records. Um, there's still glimpses of it here and there, but yeah, definitely.
So speaking of great guitarists, I'm gonna throw in a folk rock album and Richard Thompson.
Oh yeah,
I gotta tell you, Fairport, those early Fairport albums with Sandy Denny singing, even the first one with Judy Dybel, there's a lot more to them than just folk rock, like, and it really is progressive. In fact, kind of the three bands of that era, Steel Eye Span, Fairport, Pentangle. There's a lot to those groups, those guitarists, right? So, I mean, whether it's John Renbourn, um, Richard Thompson here, those guys were highly influential, right? And especially like Jimmy Page, studied these guys,
oh
right?
yeah.
So there's a lot here, the way they've kind of taken their, these traditional songs, and then the way they've arranged them. I mean, it's really amazing. And, it's good storytelling, um, good stuff.
And I just think this whole acoustic kind of pastoral angle inspired a lot of bands that came later. I mean, Genesis is a great example.
Yeah.
They're pretty acoustic 12 strings and such. It's not a far cry from this stuff.
And speaking of acoustic,
Oh,
Steve Winwood, man,
love
Graaf,
this album. Yeah, this
it's a
is,
fantastic album.
yeah, there's some really important pieces on this.
Yeah, I mean, he's, I don't know if he's gotten a lifetime award from Prague Magazine, but boy, oh boy, he could definitely use one
I don't
because
think he gets enough prog cred,
I
honestly.
agree.
But he had the chops of many of those guys. He could fit right in. Um,
You
and
put him on guitar, you put him on, keyboard, he can do it.
amazing singer. And the
Yeah,
arrangements on this are really unique. The chord progressions and such. Freedom Rider is a great example
yeah,
of a tune that just has these unusual shifts that kind of take you by surprise. And Glad, or is that the first opening
yeah.
tune? Yeah, that's just That's
Freedom Rider, yeah, it's fantastic.
um,
It's really, like it gets you going, right? I mean, it's glad, right?
50 pages. It
Yeah,
almost reminds me of early Genesis.
yeah, good stuff. So Steve Winwood, Prog God.
Just
So
didn't
then
know it.
here we go. Another Caravan, right? So this is a Canterbury album, In the Land of the Gray of Pink.
That's a big
Fantastic record. Dave Sinclair, master on the organ. The second side, is 9 Feet Underground. Fantastic piece of music.
epic. Yeah.
It just kind of, it ends on the tonic, right? It's, I guess, but that's actually maybe what I like about it is that it just rolls, it keeps you going, and it's just a great ride. So
Yeah, great riff.
Caravan were a fantastic band. I mean, there's Caravan, for girls who go plump in the night. I mean, they have some classic records. I'm gonna, this is the one I'm gonna say is kind of essential. Is this one? So interestingly enough, by the late '70s, early '80s, I was working in a record store, and we had these things called phonologue. And phonologue is like you'd have to like the worst job you had in a record store is you had to put the new pages in the phonologue because they'd update it with all the records that are in print. And we're talking like it's like it sat like on a metal tray, and it was like, I don't know, 2,000 pages, 5,000 pages, and you'd have to put them in there. But this album was in print, so it came out April '71. It was still 10 years later. It was still in print, so that says something that it's kind of a classic catalog piece.
Yeah, well, this one, I think if there's any one album to start your Canterbury fixation with, it's this one.
Yeah, it's a great
It really
great
is.
record.
It's very accessible, but there's a lot of great playing on it as well. It's not overly jazzy. There's a good dose of whimsy in the mix. You know,
Absolutely,
and
English
that,
Britishness.
yeah, and that's kind of a big part of the Canterbury stuff, that jazz meets comic
Yep.
kind of whimsy.
So now we're going to go opposite of that. We'll get dark. Atomic Rooster.
Hmm.
This is a dark album. This is a dark band. But you know, Vincent Crane is a master of his instrument. That he was definitely an organist and a composer. Fantastic. Pete French, who sang on this album, he's got a version with Steve Bolton. So they were kind of later day Atomic Rooster. They got a version of this band that's making was making the tours in the UK, and I think that's great to keep that music alive, because Vincent Crane, he left way too soon. The drummer on here, he also left a little bit too soon in life. John Ducan was another major member of that band. He's left us too. So I really love the recording of this album. In fact, the song on here, Black Snake, is one of my audition tunes. So if I want a new speaker, amp, or whatever, that's the song, because it's just unbelievable Hammond, a great mix on the drums. It's kind of simple elements, a lot of air. So it's a really great thing.
Did you say Carl Palmer was on this one?
He was on the first album, the first
Okay.
Atomic Rooster. So
By this point, he was already in ELP, I
ELP.
guess. Yeah, okay.
So I'm going to go a little out here on this one, Frumpy. So Frumpy was a German band that it's got a pretty interesting, Udo Lindenberg was, kind of early days for this band. But there's a keyboardist on here. So there's a female singer, Inga Rumpf, and then the keyboardist is Jean-Jacques Kravetz. This is like one of the heaviest organ rock albums ever made. And it's, like Deep Purple, as heavy as a Deep Purple album, but really good music. So go to, pop up a tab, go to Amazon, right? Add this to your cart. I guarantee you will not be disappointed in this album. I mean, it is heavy organ rock. And she's got a great kind of Janis Joplin, you know, rough and tumble voice. Great stuff. Back to England. Well, we got to have Van de Graaff Generator, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a really amazing band, really idiosyncratic. There's really nothing like, I think, Van der Graaf. Peter Hamill is talent. You know, his voice,
He's
his
a
lyrics.
very unique vocalist. He's it's a special blend of anguish and yearning and brashness. Occasionally he's kind of mellow, but you know, he'll go from a whisper to a scream at the drop of a hat,
Absolutely.
and often does. And I think he inspired a lot of metal guys later, like Rob Halford from Judas Priest mentions him as an influence.
Yeah,
And
John Lydon was a big fan, right? I mean,
yeah, and you know, I think that's one of the things about the vocalists or these albums early on is almost all these bands had very unique frontmen, very unique vocalists. You know, some I think things weren't quite as diverse in the following decades in a lot of cases, but back then it's almost like you had to have a really charismatic frontman with a very unique sound to his voice, and Peter Hamill absolutely is.
absolutely, and prolific, right? Like the guy, I mean, he was given a gift and he did such a fantastic job. You know, there's dozens of Van der Graaf albums, but you know, I don't know how many. I mean, I got Peter Hamill like this on the shelf, you know. This is like tons of records. So wonderful guy, very, you know, Van der Graaf fans are very fervent fans. There's a great Facebook group. You know, this is the good stuff, you know.
Yeah. And it's interesting instrumentation because it's saxophone, drums, and keyboards. They don't. I
Bass
think
pedal,
Peter.
right?
Yeah, and it's all bass pedals. I don't have a bass player per se. It's all Hugh Banton's feet, which
Yep.
is impressive. You know, I think he grew up in the church and you know playing a pipe organ, so the pedals are you know kind of a given. But uh, just watching him at Nearfest from the side of the stage one time, it was just like really intricate things he's doing with his feet that would make most people just you know stop and pause before they even tried it.
He even made so I think he built organs, like, you know, because he kind of in
I think you're right.
1976 stopped and then he just went to building organs. So I mean he had that technical side, right? Which is really amazing, right? When you think about it. Like not only was he like a world-class musician, but you know, he could tear the guts out in and out of a Hammond and you know, probably faster than anyone else.
Now, didn't George Martin produce some of the stuff for them? Was theme one on this one?
Yeah, theme one, he wrote. So George Martin wrote theme one.
Okay.
And and it's I think if you had a British pressing, it's not on there, but with the Charisma or Buddha US pressing, it is on there. So
Okay.
so one thing I got to point out is that you know if I tend to put the albums on here. You know, like I'm listening to mainly US pressings albums because that's what I got, right?
Sure.
Um, so now we're gonna move to Holland. It's a
Oh, there we
great
go.
it's a
Now,
great album.
now this is kind of a breakthrough. I mean, I remember hearing Hocus Pocus on the radio when I was a little kid, and I have a K-Tel compilation record from the early 70s that it's on. And the yodeling cracked me up at the time. It still kind of does. But
You know, these
Don
were like
Ackerman, what a hell of a guitar player, man.
yeah, he's a pretty cool guy.
Yeah.
You know that second side, right? Eruption. I mean, he's got some guitar solos in there. Whew.
Yeah, he had the chops, you know. He was shredding at a time before a lot of guys even really got around to that. You know, him and Holdsworth and a few other guys back then. But
Yeah, and you know, again, Focus, Moving Waves is a great album. The third album, right? The K or three that came after this, and then Hamburg Concerto, right? Hamburger Concerto.
yeah,
These are all like this is a great run of albums, right? And then there's also one. There was a compilation that came out that was like a cigar box. And that's one that, again, I remember, like, these were, they were cutouts, right? Like, pressed a lot because they had a good hit, a big hit, but good, Focus is good stuff. So this is October 71. So then we come here, Fragile, we talked about earlier. Um, Yes is, one of the finest moments, I think, of progressive rock is here, and that I think a lot of us heard Roundabout on the AM radio. It was a little shortened edit, it kind of took the middle of the song out. But I like to listen to this. I have a UK pressing of this, first UK pressing, and I don't think I have a better sounding record in my collection. It's a UK plum. It's a first pressing. Um, Eddie Offord, right? How important was he to their sound?
Very, and I think sonically, this is the best sounding Yes album from the '70s. It's like they had Eddie on hand, but sometimes the studio wasn't quite up to snuff. Like Relayer, they recorded mobily at Chris Squire's house,
Mm-hmm.
and this one just has a pristine quality to it. And I know like people like Steven Wilson make a career out of remixing albums, and sometimes they need them. Like Tales from Topographic Oceans is a great example of one that really benefited from his remixing. But this is perfection. You can't really better what you have on Fragile.
This
You
is,
can,
and it's the OG, right? I mean, this is really, like, if you had to pick one or two albums, if you had to pick just a handful of albums, like, okay, what's a progressive rock album? I
sure.
don't know. I'd probably say Yes, Fragile would definitely be, in my top three.
Well, I mean, I'd be for the pinnacle, I'd probably pick Close to the Edge. But
Yeah,
if I was gonna hand somebody a Yes album and say, "Here, start with this," I'd give them Fragile because it's an easier listen. It's as ambitious, but there's more variety, and then the five solo spots that
hmm
each guy does really makes it unlike any other album in their catalog, really. And
yeah,
then the
fantastic.
three big
So
epics.
one thing I will say about Tales that I think Steve Wilson, what I kind of wish he would have done is remix it to a single album. Like, I think that would be pretty interesting. There's a lot of fluff on that album, but boy, what if somebody took that and said, you know what? Let's make it a single album. Be
Well,
interesting.
I like it the way it is, but
Yeah, of course we all do.
it's arguably my favorite Yes album.
All right. So now let's go to Tull. So this was around the same time.
Oh yeah, and this is the first. It's one song. It's two
Yep.
sides, a 40-minute piece of music. And had anybody done that before this?
Nope.
I don't think so. So
Number one in the UK, number five in the US. I mean, this was a popular
it's
album.
almost like the scope and ambition alone makes it prog, but what's inside of it is very intricate as well. So it ticks all the boxes.
And they definitely, like, if you think, I think the album before this was Aqualung, which is classic rock,
Well, though, yeah, another
one of the
biggie,
greatest.
another AM radio staple and FM as well later.
But this one, they really took it to, like, their playing, I think, really went to another label, the ensemble, and just how the whole thing went together, and you put the needle down, you go to the second side, you flip it, you keep going. I mean, it's amazing. And then the gimmick sleeve. Let's not forget that, this is a newspaper, right? You can, fold it down, and, they sat there and probably had a few pints. Well, I don't know. Jethro Tull was kind of a straight-laced band, but they wrote some funny liner notes. It's classic, Monty
Yeah,
Python-esque
and
humor.
every article, every ad was made up just
Yeah,
for
it
this.
was good stuff. So now we're going to go to Gentle Giant.
Yeah,
Maybe this is a controversial choice, but I love this album.
I
Three
do
Friends.
too.
So that's the US cover, right?
Yeah.
I love this album. To
Yeah,
me, it's probably the most listenable. Like, it's just a fun album to drop the needle, listen to it all the way through.
I agree. It's super ambitious, but it's very listenable. This is actually the first one I got, and I would suggest it as a good
Yeah.
entry to their catalog. It got a little wilder, a little more intricate, a little weirder later. Um, Always interesting anyway, but there's just a flow, especially flow the way side two flows.
Hmm.
It's like that's just the best side in their catalog as far as I'm concerned.
And
But
School Days, what a
yeah,
haunting track that is, the mellotron and piano and Carrie's, he's got the higher octave voice, right?
mhm.
Just fantastic.
Yeah, his voice is kind of haunting almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, and this one you might find it with a different cover that looks like this. I just happen to have it here right now. And
Yep.
this is the original British cover, I do believe.
Hmm.
And they've reissued these on 180 milligram vinyl, which is what this is. And Derek Schulman was talking about him on the show a few months ago, and I grabbed up a bunch of them. It's just the first four, but boy, they sound delicious. It's so
Great stuff.
warm and fat. So
Yeah. Great stuff.
yeah, we had a question in the chat room. It
Oh,
says, question for Charles, Gentle Giant. What's your favorite memory?
memory of Gentle Giant. Well, I interviewed, I never saw Gentle Giant live, unfortunately. I lived in the South in Florida, and we didn't really get a lot of bands down there. We got Molly Hatchet and Rosington Collins and
A lot of
Foghat.
metal.
We got, I saw a lot of bands, right? I worked in a record store, saw a lot of bands, but Gentle Giant,
They're,
missed them.
they're pretty
So,
rare. I mean, they
but
closed up shop in the early 80s and
yeah,
didn't peep out of them for decades, you know?
yeah. And I did an interview with Derek Schulman for the second edition of the book, and that was really wonderful to talk to him
Oh,
because,
yeah, he's
yeah, the
awesome.
guy's a legend. I mean, he's, wonderful voice. And then, really an industry guy. I mean, he knows the music industry inside out. So
Absolutely.
fantastic, right?
That was a new career for him in the 80s, signing bands like Bon Jovi, of all things, and Pantera and
Yeah, yeah,
uh, others. He knew, potential when he saw it. It wasn't just about prog rock either.
yeah. He was a great guy. Great
Still
guy.
is.
Still is. And then let's go to Germany. Amann Duel. So got
Opera.
krautrock.
That's right.
The Germans. So the Germans are kind of interesting. They sang in English, right? Um, Amann Duel was an interesting band. It came out of Munich, and you had Amann Duel 2, which was like the musical side of the band. And these are just really raw albums, like definitely worth listening to if you haven't. I had the pleasure of seeing this band, albeit much later, a few years ago in Germany. Just really unique, progressive, kind of jazzy. They had some side projects, Utopia, um, really fantastic musicians. So definitely I would check this out. This is a good one here. And then Curved Air is another great band, female vocalist, right? Sonia Christina.
Right.
Um,
Did this have Stuart Copeland on drums?
nah, he wasn't here yet.
Okay.
But I got to tell you, I don't know if Curved ever made like a great album. So they kind of had Daryl Way and Francis Monkman, and they would have like one side of his songs, one side of the other guy's song. But there's two first ladies of progressive rock, and Sonia's one. Obviously, Annie Haslam is the other.
Right.
Um, but this is I think this is probably a great. I don't think you can survey progressive rock and leave Curved Air out. So this is the album
Absolutely
I
not.
would recommend to start out with.
And this is the group that a young Eddie Jobson hooked up with
Absolutely.
shortly after this.
Yep. So now here's a great, great, great album. Aphrodite's Child 666.
Yeah, that's a
So
double album, isn't it?
it's a double album.
Okay. Yeah, it's a lot
And
of
it's
music.
you know, a concept album of epic proportions, of biblical proportions, right? And you know, this is a band that gave us Vangelis, right? So
Mhm.
Vangelis, wonderful, you know, collaborations with John Anderson, you know, his 4 solo albums on RCA in the middle of the decade, middle of the 70s, just phenomenal, you know, synthesis and really, you know, interesting music. Also, Demis Rousseau, the singer, he um he was a big pop star in Europe throughout the 70s and 80s. So he had a lot of hits, but you know, his pop music kind of uh you know, definitely not progressive, but interesting, you know, that they came out with this. So they have 2 albums prior to this, which were kind of, you know, poppy psychedelic albums, very, you know, late 60s. And then Vangelis kind of holed up in a studio for a couple of years and boom, he came out with this. So this is definitely an epic album.
Oh yeah.
Here we go. Trilogy. Again, Tarkus, Trilogy, Brain Salad Surgery. Pick one. I'm picking Trilogy.
Love
I like
beat.
I like there's an evenness to this album. You know, it kind of lots of diversity in songs, right? Um, but you know, those first, you know, the Endless Enigma. I love that.
Yeah, this would be my pick out of all those early ones. It's some of them have tunes that I kind of want to skip, but there's nothing like that on this one.
No, I mean Tarkus is pretty epic. You know, boo boo
Yeah,
boo,
yeah.
right?
Well, I mean that gets my vote for my favorite ELP tune
Yeah,
easily,
but
But
I think album wise, I like this one. So
yeah,
yes, is a 2 album, right? 2 album band. You got to have Close to the Edge. Like this is
sure.
kind of it's as perfect as it gets. I mean, we see why Bill Bruford left after this because, well, this was a pinnacle.
That's true. And, this becomes, number one on so many lists. If you could have just one album that sums up what progressive rock is, this is it. And why do you suppose that is?
I mean, it's epic, right? It's definitely, you know, they lead off with the side, you know, the first side is the album side long track, right? So they lead off with, okay, here you go, 20 minutes worth of music. And, you know, I mean, it's just, you know, it gets a little slow in the, you know, I mean, I think this is an album I've heard 10,000 times or something. You know, I mean, I don't really go back to it that often, but, you know, they start off with the big one and then you flip the album over, And You and I, which is, you know, really uniquely constructed.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably the sleeper is, you know, Siberian Katru. That's, you know, that's like kind of some ballsy stuff. You know,
It
that's
is.
got a big mean sound to it.
I get a top five Yes song for me.
Yeah.
And I love that they never really tried to repeat it again later.
No, not at all.
No.
Good stuff. So we're at September 72. A month later, look what Genesis comes out with.
Their third album, well, their fourth album, their
4th album.
third proggy one, I suppose.
Yeah, you know, this is a really unique album. I gotta say that it sounds kind of, I mean, it's got unique production, right? Like it doesn't, nothing really sounds like this too much. Um, really good, you know, obviously you got Supper's Ready, which is, you know, the epic of epics. But I think this is really where Genesis kind of like, you know, they're like, we're going to be a big band. And, you know, it was a number 12 in the UK. Um, in America, you know, these albums were put out on Buddha, I think did the Charisma licensing. And, by the time I found this album, it was a cutout, you know, which means it cost like $1.99, which, you know, sorry kids, but $1.99 used to be a lot of money. You know, $5 used to be a lot of money.
Sure.
Not so much anymore, but um, really, this is, you know, I think they kind of really Genesis found their, you know, like this is where we're gonna we're going to grow from here. And they really grew from this. And, you know, to think that the next album is Selling England by the Pound, which is, you know, maybe one of their most consistent albums.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And you know, the opening track, "Watcher of the Skies," is just a definitive must-have progressive rock track, if ever there was one. Um,
Yeah, it's, you know, Mellotron, right?
yeah, that's like the supreme Mellotron song, you know, on a very short list, along with like "In the Court of the Crimson King" and some Moody Blues, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to mention one underrated tune, "Can Utility" and the Coastliners, which I think is such an amazing piece of music. You know, it starts with this kind of Victorian, is Elizabethan sounding kind of 12-string stuff. And then the last 3 minutes is just full on Genesis.
Yeah.
You know, it's just
Yeah, there are,
wonderful.
you know, I mean, Genesis could be as heavy a band as any. You know, it's one thing that, you know,
Absolutely. You know, sometimes just an icy chord on the Mellotron was as heavy as any heavy metal band's power chords or whatever. More
and, you know,
so.
we had Phil. This was Phil, you know, Phil was a drummer. I mean, he sang a lot actually back then, but, you know, Phil's a phenomenal drummer, right?
Absolutely. One of prog rock's greatest. Easily.
Oh, so now we're going to switch gears a little bit. Family Bandstand.
Okay.
So not all progressive rock dealt with, you know, sci fantasy and silver capes and airbrush art. And I think this is kind of a good, so, you know, John Wetton plays on this album.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you have Roger Chapman, who has a great voice, somewhere around Peter Gabriel and Dave Cousins, I think. You know, they kind of have those raspy
Yeah.
voices, but just this is a great songwriting album. Like the songs on here are just phenomenal. And you know, like I said, not all progressive rock is, you know, silver capes and you know, airbrushed art. Like this is probably a good example of, you know, it's pretty sophisticated rock music, and we're going to throw that one out there.
Okay. Yeah.
Now we're going to go even a little more obscure. This is probably the most obscure album I'm going to recommend
Yeah.
because um um Tassavallan Presidentes from Finland, and this is an album that just put in your cart and buy it or look it up on Spotify or however you do your music. It'll blow your mind. It's going to remind you a little bit of Early Tall. It's going to remind you of not like Early Tall, but it's really a unique album. And, you know, Finland gave us, you know, two great bands, Tassavallan Presidente and Wigwam. They're fantastic bands. And this is definitely, you know, like, it's obscure, I got to admit, but definitely worth the effort.
Well, yeah.
And then Germany, people love this band. Egi Bamiasi, so bonus points if you can actually pronounce that. But this, I think, you know, Tagomago, you know, you look at kind of their early output. This album really like played well, you know, like I think
Would
a lot of people could listen to this album
Would you
and
consider this krautrock?
yeah, it's krautrock, but you know, to me, krautrock is, you know, they're kind of progressive rock, krautrock. You know, they're very similar. You know, like I'd say, krautrock is kind of you know, falls under the umbrella of progressive rock, right? It's psychedelic, but it's where psychedelic rock went next. You know,
Yeah.
and in Germany, it went to krautrock, and we'll get to some more German bands that are kind of different. You know, maybe not krautrock as much, but they're more progressive rock. But this is definitely, you know, I think you gotta. I think when you're looking at that landscape of the '70s, you got to throw a Can record in there. So
Sure.
that's a
Is
Can
that
record.
okra?
Yeah, Okra. So here's Green Slade debut album. You know, this album, Bedside Manners, two great records. I personally love this album. Two keyboardists, right? Dave Greenslade, Dave Lawson, both named Dave. Even, you know, even more unique or not, but great music.
Yeah, I
Andy
mean,
McCullough
absolutely.
came out of King Crimson, I believe, and then Tony Reeves was here. Just great stuff. So
And a great Roger Dean cover too.
absolutely one of his finest.
It really is.
Yeah. So all right, maybe the
Sure.
greatest record of the '70s. I still got the posters and the stickers,
Well,
but
that's an important record. I mean, in so many ways. I mean, conceptual, um, musically, and otherwise. There's even a little bit of early EDM kind of stuff on here with On the Run.
yep. Dun,
So
dun, dun. But the other thing is everyone knows this record, right? Like it's sold, I don't know how many gazillion copies, and it was on the charts for I don't know how long, but this is something that, wherever you are in the world, you can kind of say Pink Floyd and, Dark Side of the Moon, somebody's going to know what you're talking about.
sure, it's just pretty much a perfect record.
Yeah. Uh Tubular Bells. So the interesting thing about Mike Oldfield is, he was a kind of a folk band with his sister. And he was really young, I believe, when this thing came out, when he was recording it. But this is where Richard Branson made his start. Branson had some record stores, and then in '73, he's like, I got a record label now, and the next few records are all going to be off Virgin, and they're pretty. I don't know if it was, I don't know if it was Branson that was the A&R guy. I think it was Simon Draper was, but um, the next few records that they put out, Virgin Records, those early records are really kind of, this is kind of the peak, the heyday of a British progressive rock. So you have Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, you have Gong's Flying Teapot, the first, installment of the Radio Gnome trilogy. So this is kind of David Allen's, the 3 albums, great stuff. I'm a huge Gong fan. I'm going to
Oh yeah,
quick
I love
skip
them.
over this album. We're going to go to Henry Cow, right? So we have the first Henry Cow album coming out, a couple months later. So this is again Virgin Records. And Henry Cow is kind of the left field. No, there's a lot of guys on progressive ears that love this stuff.
Oh yeah, when you're in for this, you're in 100%. And this is kind of what we call the advent realm of progressive rock. It's a little more harmonically thorny, um, but it can be very satisfying once you really absorb it. But it's a different ball of wax when it comes to instrumentation and just approaches in general.
And thorniness, I think, is a really good adjective because it's it's not really easy listening. It's not smooth.
Yeah, it's not just smoke a fatty and lay back and
Right.
float away. It's more like this thing's you're gonna feel like you're in a car wreck before it's over.
Challenge your mind. So, and
Yeah.
then the other one that came out, the Faust 4,
Oh
right?
yeah.
There's another record that came out on Virgin. Germans came over. They're a really unique band. There's some crazy stories around Faust. But this was kind of Virgin Records, right? They had, a lot of these albums they released for like the price of a single. The Faust tapes, which is the album before this, and Branson and his people, like they definitely made their mark, right? And they found a lot of musicians. I don't know if they paid them. You hear a lot of stories, but Branson's made an empire out of this. So let me just quick go back. We forgot one Italian band in here, Le Orme,
Yeah.
and this is some great record here. So the thing that's interesting about, we go back to that Pawn Hearts. Pawn Hearts was a #1 album in Italy. And, I did talk to PFM about this. And, one thing that Franz said is he goes, this was the music that we listened to. We listened to progressive rock, like everyone, like an entire generation. You know, it wasn't just a couple of freaks at a university or something like that. It's like that was popular music. And so obviously the Italians, probably one of the richest progressive rock scenes, you know, in the early 70s, you know, early to mid 70s, you know, absolutely phenomenal groups. And I think Les Armes is probably one of the beginning. So this album's kind of unique. There's an English version and an Italian version. If you get the CD reissue, you get both, right? Some people like Peter Hamill actually wrote the lyrics for the English version, but you know, great band. You know, they put out a lot of albums in the '70s, kind of all over the place. You know, some were orchestral. You know, they like changed around a bit, but great band. So then we're going to go back to England, and we got Manfred Mann.
Yeah, you know, some amazing Moog playing on these records. And you know, everybody thinks of, you know, the song about Quinn the Eskimo, but there's a lot more. Blinded by the Light, you know, but there's a lot more to them than just that.
There's a lot more to him, and you know, Chapter 3 was kind of his post, you know, Quinn the Eskimo. Chapter 3 is a really sexy kind of organ brass sound album. And then I think they did 2 albums, and then he did the Earth Band. And you know, this is great music. I mean, this is, you know, these are albums that, you know, you listen to and you go, wow, you know, like there's some pretty amazing. I think Argent kind of falls into the same realm, you know,
Yeah,
like, you know,
that's a
they have
good
some
connection.
really great albums, right? You know, Nexus for Argent. You know, these are progressive rock albums. They don't have all the flash, you know, the silver capes kind of thing, but you know, the music's there. I mean, it's fantastic music. So, all right. Now here's is probably as unique as you get.
Yeah, this is again kind of in the avant realm of progressive rock. The Rio. Explain what that is all
Yeah,
about.
so rock in opposition. You know, I think a lot of this music was left field. And, you know, ultimately the bands, you know, through kind of Chris Cutler of Henry Cow, they kind of said, well, let's create our own economy. And, you know, they banded together and they played together and they sold their records together. And, you know, there's no way they were going to fit into the mainstream. So they kind of carved their own niche out and, you
Mhm.
know, rock in opposition. There's a festival in France, I think almost every year, right? That most of these bands are still, you know, getting together to play. But, you know, Christian Vander invented his own language, right? Horst für den Stecken West, right?
Mhm.
You know, you know, it's part Carl Orff, right? It's part, you know, maybe John Coltrane. You know, a lot of 2 chords in this too, you know, like, but amazing music, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's almost got a
unique.
hypnotic quality to a lot of it, where they'll just take a riff and just kind of build it over and over, and then they'll kind of chant on top of it.
Hmm.
And the next thing you know, you're in the middle of a Klingon opera.
Right.
That's really
Exactly.
what this stuff is like. It's like
Exactly.
he created a language just for this band to sing their lyrics in. Who does that? Like nobody does that, you
The
know. And
one
it's
guy.
basically the story of some civilization that like came to populate Earth thousands of years ago, and kind of their trials and tribulations over the course of several records, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I guess Herb Albert actually signed him to A&M Records, which is kind of unique, right?
Yeah, well, you know, he obviously knew something special was happening there, you know. And yeah, it's just it's its own world. There's really nothing quite like Magma,
Nothing, nothing. I mean,
no,
it's
you know. But
good stuff.
it's definitely not on your sunny side of the spectrum. It's
No, no, no.
pretty dark and moody music.
So here's another, you know, we're going to go Wigwam is another Finnish band. Bean is just kind of a really epic album. So, you know, there's some fantastic players. There's a bassist, Pekka Pahola. in this,
Oh,
and he's fantastic. Jim Pembroke is a British singer that lived in Finland. Wonderful voice, and he's got a really great, his melody writing, is really fantastic. And just some of the songs here that you just, like they just kind of get in your brain, and then you're singing them for a week. So this is a great album here. Camel, you got to listen to a Camel album. Okay, the Snow Goose, Mirage, there's no wrong answer,
Moon
but
Madness.
yeah, Moon Madness. I mean, there's no wrong answer. I like this album a lot.
This is the first one I had, and tunes like Free Fall are among my favorites, and of course, Lady Fantasy is maybe the definitive Camel song. And
Yeah,
again,
you get a little Token in here too, right? Nimrodel and
yeah, and just Andy Latimer's guitar playing. He's just one of the finest progressive rock guitarists that people don't know about. This is
lyrical.
like a band that's bubbling right under the surface under Yes and Genesis. It's like the next place to go once you've got all the obvious commercial stuff under your
Yeah.
belt. It's very
Yeah, and they definitely, they never had the hit. They never had, the one US tour or whatever, and it's kind of too bad because, they kept on putting albums out.
yeah, they did for
Till
well into the
84, I think.
2000s, yeah.
Um, and then they came back right in the 90s, right? I remember being at the very first Prague Fest, and there was Pete Bardens in the crowd, kind of checking out what was going on.
Awesome. Yeah, and seeing Camel at Nearfest was one of my
Yeah.
best Nearfest memories. And for years I was like, get Camel, and then they did, and it was just like, tears. It was a very emotional
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah, and definitely another band that's got like a great fan base, people that absolutely adore their music. I mean, Camel's not like you don't look for heavy rock with Camel because it's not really there. It's on the lighter side of things, but very lyrical, very, beautiful music.
Super melodic, yeah, regal, majestic,
Good stuff.
and kind of uplifting. It isn't,
Yeah.
it's not really any dark, sinister Camel songs. It's not really like that.
No, good stuff. So PFM
Oh yeah, one of the greatest Italian bands.
of all times. I mean, just unbelievable the albums they put out. This is a US version, right? Isola di Niente is the Italian version. Um, you know, Wonderful players. These guys can definitely, they got chops as good as anyone else. Um, and they played a lot in the US. Opening for like Peter Frampton, and like kind of weird, but there's a live album called Cook, which I think came out after this. That was actually the first album I got of theirs. And these guys were really special. It's a special band. There's another maybe slightly obscure album, RTE Mestieri, Arts and Crafts. Great Italian band. This album is really, it's got that unison playing. It's got a palette of keyboards that are, Hammond, Mellotron. Great album. I play this album for people and they kind of go, wow, how did I miss that? And I go, yeah, pretty much everyone missed it, but
Sure.
it's fantastic stuff. So we're going to go from Italy. We're going to move to Germany. Grabschnitt. I love this band. They were kind of, they were a funny band, right? They all had made up names, right? Erok is kind of most famous, right? Because he's a mastering engineer, and pretty much if it came out in Germany in the 70s and it was reissued on CD, Erok, the drummer for this band, he did the remastering. But this album in particular, it's a double album set. They've got a piece of music called Solar Music. Do you hear solar music? And that's a piece that they would play for a half hour or an hour live. I must have, I don't know, a dozen or so versions of it. But just venerable space rock. The first album, it's got an early Yes kind of sound to it, but they did later albums were fantastic, right? Jumbo and some of their other stuff was great, and they turned into kind of a pop band in the 80s, switched to the German language, but this is good stuff there. France, Ange. Right, so there's two brothers here, Christian and Francis de Camp. Christian, wonderful singer. There's very much a foxtrot nursery crime quality to this album. It's not really a copy or anything, but just a similar aesthetic. He's kind of an interesting keyboard player because I believe he just used his like index fingers.
Yeah.
So he kind of plays in a unique way. So really an interesting album. Beautifully written, beautifully recorded, just a lot. And especially if you're into early Genesis, like check this out. All right, this is maybe my favorite.
Yeah, it's my favorite, I think. Although
I've listened to it 8 million times, but they really nailed it here. I think this was kind of about Nixon. I've never really asked Derek Schulman that, but kind of came out during Watergate or after Watergate.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's really perfectly recorded. Like the Steve Wilson, actually the 5-1 mix is pretty special. But if you just find like a cheap CD on One Way Records, it still sounds fantastic. It's just an amazing recording. And the transfer to CD, it's just phenomenal. So, Red. So the last King Crimson album, maybe the best King Crimson album. I don't know. I love this album. I love it so much. I think you guys can see. I got it on my wall.
Ah, yeah, sure enough.
So, you kind of wonder, like, if Fripp didn't stop King Crimson here, what would have happened?
I think it would have been an awkward transition into the 80s with I don't know. It's interesting to see what happened to a lot of our favorites as they grappled for relevance in the late 70s. You get albums like Tormato and Love Beach.
Yeah.
And, I don't think Crimson would have wound up that weird, but who knows? I've always applauded Fripp for knowing when to pull up stakes and get the heck out of town and wait to come back, And this is like your proto metal inspired. The title track alone is just a lesson in melodic dissonance.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thrash cymbal on One More Red Nightmare.
Best sounding
really
cymbal
amazing.
ever. And Bruford actually is selling some of his gear, and one of the pieces in it is a bended cymbal that somebody tried to recreate that sound.
Wow.
But it never really worked because the other one was like bent up. They literally bent it to stick it in the trash can. So when it came out, it was just in a lump, and that's kind of why it sounded so cool, so ratty, so trashy.
Wonder how he found it.
He just lucked out, and found it in the trash can.
Right.
Yeah.
So great album. This is probably I think this is an album that almost transcends progressive rock. It's a rock album that, if you're into rock music, you got to listen to this record.
It kind of blends a couple different schools of thought with Crimson also. You have your really skronky, abrasive tunes like Red and Red Nightmare. And then you have stuff that's more like, kind of some of the regal, majestic stuff from the first album in the closing tune, Starless.
Yeah.
Tons
Great
of mellotron and really majestic guitar playing. And then
you also have the horns, right? He kind of brought back Ian McDonald, right? And I think Mel Collins were also on this.
Yeah, sax solos on Red Nightmare. That's a good example. and there's like some cornet on some of the tunes, maybe Fallen Angel.
Yeah.
So yeah, just a lot of variety here, and Starless, with that, they basically boil it down to one note and then build it all back up, and that's just a wonderful study in dynamics.
Yeah.
And just, yeah, I mean, that was a good tune to kind of end that era on. And and about as majestic and epic as Crimson got. Crimson was never a band to do these long 10-minute, 20-minute things.
Right.
Very rarely. I guess you could kind of, Lizard kind of has a suite that kind of borders on that, but that's really the exception.
Yeah, definitely not the rule. So this is a Gong album.
That's maybe
Everybody
the best
loves
one.
Second Side here. I mean,
Well, this is like the perfect blend between the early psychedelic whimsy and Pierre Morlin's Gong that came later,
yep,
that was totally percussion based. This is kind of like the perfect blend. And I think this is the template for later space rock groups like Ozric Tentacles.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean that the Isle of Everywhere, it's just got this mega riff, and then you let Steve Hillage and Didier Malherbe, play over that. I mean, this is one where you sink into the couch with your favorite mindset, and you're definitely going to go everywhere.
Yeah, Master Builder. I mean, that's some
Great
jamming
stuff.
stuff.
Great stuff. And he kind of, David Allen is, like, I mean, I get that some people think he's kind of silly and stuff, but he's a wonderful guy. Met him on many occasions. Very lucky to have met him, and he was definitely a genius. So this is one of my favorite progressive rock albums. It covers so many grounds. It has so many wonderful moments in it. It has one of Steve Hackett's, one of my favorite guitar solos of him, right in the Lamia. This is just a great album, and again, it's Peter Gabriel left after this album because kind of, I agree. Like, they kind of hit a pinnacle here. They hit a point where they needed to reset afterwards because, you can't really do anything after this. You got 4 sides of music and, one oblique story, but it's kind of like, I think it's kind of like, I think as a male, you can relate to this story, about finding who you are and what you're made of, and, dealing with women, and, it's all in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, it's arguably one of the greatest progressive rock albums ever. It's at the top of the list for a lot of people.
Good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Barclay James Harvest. So here's another, a band kind of like Camel, maybe. Were they progressive? Were they prog? They kind of, their first 4 albums for EMI were basically a lot of orchestra, right? So I think they were kind of the first band to say, not only are we going to play with an orchestra, we're going to tour with an orchestra. And, probably didn't make any money doing that. But you had, by the time this album came out, they switched to Polydor, dumped all the orchestra, probably got a new manager that says, well, we're never going to make any money doing that. And you just have Mellotron and guitar. And I mean, this is a live album that really, I don't have a whole lot of live albums in the book, but this is one live album that it's kind of got the best of everything they've done. And it's definitely, Barclay James Harvest put out a lot of albums over a lot of years. But I think this is a great one to listen to. Good, solid guitar playing, wonderful keys. So definitely fun. Here's one for you, Audubon.
I guess with your shirt.
Yeah, sure does. I bought the 45 of this when it came out. So I heard it on AM radio, right? And you're going like, a German band? Who ever heard of German bands? This is
Sure.
kind of the first one that, this was an international hit. Um, that again, that this, the side Audubon side is just, it's a wonderful journey. You can kind of hear the cars passing by, right? And, as you're listening to the song, you hear the whoosh, and it's just like you're driving down the Autobahn. So wonderful, wonderful band. They definitely were kind of ahead of their time. A lot of the electro things that came afterwards were from them. Good band. Nectar were an English band, but based in Germany. This is definitely an album that somebody's going to say, nah, Charles, this isn't the right album.
I'm a little
You should have,
surprised you picked that one, but
I am.
yeah.
But there's just something I love about this album. And, the quote is, as he would later remark, the album was their magical mystery tour. Yeah, I mean, this is a fun record, I mean, it's, yeah, sure, Recycled is pretty good. Remember the Future. I mean, they're all
Well,
fantastic records.
they had a string of epic records, and this one is kind of not so epic, but still very entertaining.
Here's another German band, Novalis. So this is a little, kind of maybe on the less known. But I got to tell you one thing about Novalis is in 1975 when this album came out. So Akeem Reichel he was a member of the Rattles. He did AR and Machines. He's a pretty famous German, early guy. Shared the stage with the Beatles, kind of thing. He produced this band, and I think the interesting point here is they actually went to German lyrics for this record, and they were one of the first German bands that says, you know what, we're going to sing in our native tongue. We're going to stop, singing in English. And then you get, I mean, English obviously is kind of the lingua franca of rock and roll, but with that, they kind of have this romantic element, kind of like Camel in that respect, but romantic element, to their music. And this is really, really a beautiful album. So that's definitely one. Check it out if you haven't heard of them. There's some great records there. Hawkwind, I got to throw a Hawkwind album in there.
Space rock.
Love this. Another one. I got the poster on the wall. I think you guys can see. In fact, that I scanned that poster. And so if you ever got the box set, it's a scan, that poster.
All right.
Poster in there.
So I'm surprised you didn't pick Hall of the Mountain Grill.
That's a great record. I mean, In Search of Space is a great record. The later stuff, Quark, Strangest in Charm, with kind of when Rob Calvert was a front man. Hawkwind has just an amazing history. Dave Brock still keeps it going. They had their kind of metal years, right, in the 80s. Space Bandits, right? 91 is another fantastic album. But again, Hawkwind is really important, band, I think, kind of in that era. They kind of were part of that, Free Festival, underground scene. So great album. You got a, great band. And this album's just got some great songs on it. So, Lemmy's Swan Song. Simon House is on here. So you added violin, which kind of brought them up, the music quotient a little bit. But great stuff.
Very cool.
Van der Graaf, you got to have another Van der Graaf.
From a later era.
Mark II. They put the band back together. And this is just one that, if you're angry with the world, put this album on. This is definitely Hugh Banton, masterful organ sound, Guy Evans, Peter Hamill, David Jackson, right, on the saxes. Just really deep, dark music.
Yeah, it really is. Scorched Earth is a favorite on here.
Oh, yeah. So if you're angry with the world and you want to listen to some music, God Bluff.
Yeah, I think this is my preference over the earlier stuff.
Yeah, I like this period too. Still Life, the album that came out, World Record. These are it's a trilogy of records. I think they were all released within like, I don't know, 18 months of each other.
Yeah,
So, I kind of look at it as one body of work, but just wonderful stuff.
sure.
Um, so then we're in 75 now, the end of 75. Chris
Yeah.
Squire.
Yeah, arguably the greatest Yes solo album.
My quote is going to be, the album contains the same majesty of Yes with the added distinction of not sounding like Yes at all.
Fair enough, because it really is its own thing.
It's its
I,
own.
and it's interesting how Mraz and Bruford met on this one. They went on to collaborate quite a bit in the future.
Yeah, with their duets. Yep.
Yeah.
But
So
wonderful, wonderful album. All the Yes members did solo albums. Anderson's was pretty cool, right? Elias of Sun Hello.
yeah, it's one of his best. It's kind of one of the first new age albums, I'd like to say.
Yeah, I mean, I always think that that's Vangelis playing the synthesizers on that
Yeah,
album.
he swears it's all him, and well, I guess we'll never really know for
We'll
sure.
never really know, but it kind of sounds like Vangelis. And obviously those guys had a big collaboration together. But Steve's album was, I don't know. I mean, I kind of like his second one, the
Beginnings,
Steve Al
yeah,
album.
yeah, I think I do too, actually.
Patrick Moraz Story of I is wonderful album. Very diverse, right?
Very,
Kind of
yeah, that's pretty
Brazilian.
wild stuff. Yeah, and Alan's Ramshackled is a weird hodgepodge of this and that. Um,
But I think Chris nailed it. This is the
yeah,
one that it's all here.
and, he joked about doing a follow up. For years after it, but it never really happened. I mean, he did start writing more music with Billy Sherwood, but it's a different ball of wax than this.
Yeah, this is
It's
a
kind
great,
of,
great, great record. So,
yeah,
and this one got the reissue, I think, last year. I know there's a Blu-ray coming out later this year. So I would love to hear the 5-1 mix of this, because it's a wonderful, Lucky Seven, right? You got the electric
sure.
piano and Bruford's drum, and then the bass comes in, and
Yeah, that's one of my
choir
favorite
sounds
tracks.
phenomenal.
Yeah, that's a very to the point, not very orchestrated track versus something like Silently Falling that is just glorious, and
12-string guitar, and
or a safe canon song. That's another one that just builds and builds and builds, and really epic stuff
yeah,
without
good.
being the cliched prog epic kind of stuff. Really, it's different than that.
Yeah, definitely is. And it doesn't sound like Yes, so
No, it really doesn't. No, and
kind
Chris's
of nice.
voice never sounded better than on that record.
So I wanted to throw a band from Japan in, Far East Family Band. Um, Kitaro, who is a very famous new age artist,
Sure.
who was actually in this band. They were originally called Far Out. And this is definitely space rock, but, uniquely so, it sounds like nothing quite sounds like this. Maybe you'll say, oh, that kind of, metal era Pink Floyd or whatever, but these guys just have one phenomenal record. So, let's go over to the Far East. Not a whole lot of, not a lot of rock came out of Japan, right, in the 70s, but this is just a wonderful, fun kind of psychedelic album.
Very cool.
Kron.
Mm-hmm.
So, this band, I call them the happiest band in Germany. Their music just makes you feel good. Helmut Hattler is,
Amazing bass player.
amazing bass player. In 1981, I spent a summer in Germany, and I went to a Rainbow concert. Met two brothers. They spoke some English. I spoke a little German. We started talking about music, and I'm like, oh, I love Chris Squire's bass, and they go, you have very English taste in music. You should listen to Helmut Hattler. He is a very good bass player, and he absolutely is. And Kran's music is just very uplifting. It really makes you feel good, dance across the room kind of music. And they definitely are an early jam band.
Okay.
Live they would take something and they would stretch it out.
So
So
these are
early jam band.
the Grateful Dead of Prague.
Yep. So here's our triple Mellotron album, right?
Oh yeah, that's a biggie.
Yeah, this is a good one. Um, Schick, Fears, and Fröhling. These guys, you know, so the one of them had Schicka, he had it was like a half Rickenbacker bass, and the other half of the guitar was a double neck guitar. The other half was a Les Paul.
That's really
And
good.
it was like somebody sandwiched them together for him.
My back hurts just thinking about it.
Yeah, I know, right? You had to sit down and play that,
No doubt.
everyone would play Mellotron at some point. This is just a really unique album. It's a great palette. I think it's a Connie Planck production. So, it's just really a great, unique album. So definitely worth checking out. Ken Golden from Laser's Edge was the first to reissue this on CD. So props to Ken. Hölderlin, my favorite German band. When you think about German music, you have Krautrock, which is kind of psychedelic and, a little out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of have some true progressive rock bands, Novalis, Grabschnitt, Hölderlin. This album, really a beautiful album. So the singer is Naps Napani. He also plays viola. He has a wonderful English voice, right? And I got to tell you, Eloy is a band that I love, right? But sometimes Frank singing kind of, had that accent.
Mm-hmm.
None of that here. It's got, it came out in 76, and there's like a trick of the tail quality to this, of that just beauty and precision.
Mm-hmm. Well, this makes me think of a lady at Progressive Ears named Renata. You might remember her. She's biggest fan of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. She actually burned some like videos for me and, sent them across the Atlantic Ocean. So wonderful.
Awesome lady. Yes, absolutely.
But it's a really beautiful album. The second side is the Cloud side, and it's more instrumental and really just like you just sink into the couch, sink into your mind. And, this is really, like when really good progressive rock can kind of lift you up, float you across the room. So wonderful, wonderful album. So second lady, the first lady of progressive rock, Annie Haslam, wonderful band, crazy history, right? From being ex-Yardbirds to no ex-Yardbirds.
Oh, that's such a weird connection. You'd never guess. And this is another one I think that was influenced by the likes of Fairport.
Yeah.
This, beautiful acoustic textures, 12 strings and such. Not on every song, but the majority, I'd say, has got this kind of pastoral quality. And John Camp is an amazing bass player.
Amazing.
Very much in this Chris Squire mode. I think he was probably a big fan of his. That same kind of trebly Rick sound. It's all over Renaissance music.
Yeah. I mean, just the Ashes Are Burning on this is, it's just the orchestra steps aside and it's just the band playing. And you realize that these guys can really rock, and, Annie's voice is just so pure. And, this album's, Novella, the album that came after this, I really love that album too. Song of Scheherazade came before. I just, I think if you're going to start with a Renaissance album, just everything that's wonderful about them is in this album. So
right, and some of these are the definitive versions of these songs.
Yeah. So now let's go to America, because
yes,
we got one of the best progressive rock bands of the universe in
my
Kansas.
hometown boys.
These guys are amazing.
They really are. They managed to take the English thing and give it their own twist.
Absolutely. It's
And it's a short
definitely
list.
American music.
It is, but there's stuff that almost reminds me of Gentle Giant and like Magnum Opus.
Love that.
Such an amazing piece. Originally that was called the Leftoverture because it was all made out of leftovers that all the guys had, and then eventually they're like, well, we better call the album that because it's too cool of a pun to not use. So they just call it the Magnum Opus. But yeah, Carry On Wayward Son, that's a tune that is played every day, even now. It's part of that top 100 classic rock list that just gets regurgitated ad nauseum. But it still sounds fresh. And this is like the best engineered Kansas album also.
Absolutely.
It's,
Yeah,
it,
I think those earlier ones maybe suffered a little, but by the
yeah,
time this one came out, it was like
yeah. This is just
perfect.
dialed in beautifully. Jeff Glixman was, a lifesaver with them.
Yeah.
And
And I think also, there's no dud on here. I mean, this is side one, flip it, side two. There's no dud. I mean, everything is just really driving rock. I mean, that's the thing
really,
about
yeah, and nothing
carrying on.
cheesy either. I think a few of the tunes on some of the later albums that followed this were lyrically a little wacky. But this is just, this is the one to start with.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much all their 70s stuff is great, but this is the one where everything just came together perfectly. So I definitely start with that. And yeah, arguably the greatest American progressive rock band.
Absolutely. And they still got it, by the
Have
way.
you heard the new one?
Fantastic, right?
There you go, Scott. My friend Scott was asking if you'd heard the new one, and yeah, wow,
Fantastic. They
yeah,
still got it,
they
you
do.
know?
They've got a fresh writing team, but they understand what it takes to make the Kansas sound. And in some
And they
ways,
got Tom Brislin.
they've incorporated some newer things too, some kind of heavier. It almost reminds me of Clockwork Angels, Rush. That era, just big, mean riffage.
Yeah, and they
Uh,
got Tom Brislin, right, on keys.
they do, so yeah, suddenly there's all these cool piano intros and he sings a song, the song "The River Sang." That's the
Hmm.
last song of the album, and that's for a lot of people's favorite.
Yeah,
It doesn't really sound exactly like a typical Kansas song, but you know, Kansas had a few different singers over the course of an album. So it's not unusual to have the main guy sing most of it and then have somebody else sing a couple other songs. So yeah,
great
kudos to
stuff.
him. Big inspiration.
We're gonna go north a little bit.
Okay, yeah,
Canada.
good. That was one that was in my batch of vinyl tonight, as a matter of
All
fact.
right.
This is kind of the one where I think it really gelled and matured all at the same time in a great way.
Yeah. So 2112 was the album where I think you know I guess the story is that Rush were about to get the boot. It's kind of like, all right, guys, this is the
Right.
last album.
Kind of the
Better make
typical, I think they got a 4 album deal instead of
yeah.
a 3 album, but it was another kind of, Kansas was the same thing. The fourth album was like, this is the last one. You better get a hit or you're out of here. And bingo, it happened.
And I mean, in kind of classic Rush fashion, they're like, we're gonna do whatever we want.
Right.
And they came up with 2112, which the buying public, I mean, I specifically remember, being at my cousin's house and they had that album. It had just come out. And, I'm like going, da-dun, da-dun. And, it just
yeah.
grabbed you. But and then the live album came out, which, pretty much every kid had that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And
All the world's
then
a stage.
everyone had that. And then this came out and, they got their good record deal. They said, let's go to England. Let's go to Rockfield where, Van der Graaf recorded their albums. And everything came together here. I mean, this
Yeah.
really is,
I
they
mean,
had
like,
Cinderella Man, which is, kind of pointed to their, the fact that they could actually make hits.
yeah, well, closer to the heart. I mean, that's just
Yeah,
a perfect little pop song. That's what I think I pointed out earlier is like they could do these really epic, busy things, but they had a knack for writing a perfect little pop song from the get-go. I mean, Fly By Night's a great example,
absolutely.
and that was
Make
on the
short work.
second album. I mean, they kind of had a knack for it from the get-go.
Yeah.
And the best Rush albums kind of had all of that on it. And this is one of them. You got your 10-minute epics like Xanadu, and then you got this wonderful little 3-minute pop nugget, you know.
Yeah, Hemispheres, cut from the same mold, right?
Yeah,
Maybe even a little more so. We got wonderful trees on there, right? And
yeah, I'd say that's the pop nugget on that, but even that's a little more ambitious, you
it
know,
is, yeah. But
definitely.
Rush, wonderful band, right? And we're gonna still get to them, but this one I'm gonna throw in here, Tangerine
Oh
Dream,
yeah,
Cyclone.
that's
Really
pretty.
kind of a controversial album in their catalog because it's their progressive rock album. They added a drummer, they added a singer who also played wind instruments, and they only did it once. So, I mean, it was one experiment. And oddly enough, this was a very successful album in Germany for the band. So, where they had a lot of success outside Germany, um, this one actually, they got some success inside Germany. And, Tangerine Dream has such a long, arduous catalog and path. You have the first 4 records on Or, which are venerable krautrock. Then they signed with Virgin, Phaedra, Stratosphere, which is one of my favorite albums. And Ricochet in the middle. Then they kind of go here to Cyclone, where they try something very different. But it's still a Tangerine Dream record, and there's some great music on here. And then after that, Force Majeure, which I think we can see. I got when I was working at a record store,
There you go. Okay.
Mobile, right? So,
Mhm.
still got that hanging up in the cave. But Tangram, you know, you got to listen to some Tangerine Dream, to kind of understand where the keyboards, the synthesizers, the sequencers came in,
You
and
know, I
just
think for
great
a
music.
lot of us might have heard him originally in movies. When
Absolutely,
like
Sorcerer,
Midnight Express, I think was a Tangerine Dream. Yeah, it might have been one.
Sorcerer, right? With that was Wages of Fear. It was originally a French film. Roy Scheider, right?
Yeah, yeah. I just remember seeing HBO and my dad saying, "Have you ever heard of Tangerine Dream?
Yeah,
That's some really interesting music." And
yeah.
it's
And
like,
it was actually around that time that I know that Stratosphere came out, the Sorcerer soundtrack, and then they toured in '77, which I begged my parents, like, can I go see him? Can I go see him? And they're like, nah, you're not going to go see him. So, it's a big regret. But, these guys definitely, they've got their place, and you owe it to yourself to listen to, a couple of their albums because, it's very wonderful music.
and very,
Three guys,
very synth based too. There's some pioneering synth work on these records.
yeah, and sequencers, right? It's
Right.
all.
It kind of points to a lot of EDM and other things, you
Mhm.
know.
All right, so here's my most controversial album.
That's a good one. I like it.
So, I mean, I know that people love Wind in the Wuthering, Trick of the Tail. Those are fantastic
I
records.
believe I
Steve
like
Gadd,
it so much. I have 2 of them right now.
nice,
It wasn't
very.
intentional. I gave away a batch of redundant vinyl that I had, but I somehow missed that one. So if anybody
Yeah,
wants one, let me know.
so I mean, the thing here is, and I think the historical significance here is that you have, the album closes with "Follow You, Follow Me." It's a track that almost didn't make it onto the album, but it marks not only the end of side 2, but it kind of closes a chapter in
Oh,
Genesis.
very much. It very much points like this is where we're heading next.
Yep.
It doesn't really have much to do with the rest of the record. It's kind of its own thing. Maybe
And
that's why
I
it's
mean,
easier to tell
yeah,
the
Duke.
name.
The next album, Duke's Travels, was very, kind of had that classic Genesis sound, but
Yeah.
this album, there's so much good in here. Down and Out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Deep in the Mother Lode.
Burning Rope.
Burning Rope is one of Tony Banks', finest
The
compositions.
Lady Lies. That's
Just
pretty.
all good music. 11th, it's their 11th record, and this is, they had 11 songs on here. So they started to shrink, I think, a little bit. They kind of said, well, we don't have Steve to do a solo, but let's bring the songs down in size. And again, this just points to the future,
Yeah,
where Phil became a megastar.
and this is kind of like the Tony Banks album, I think.
Yeah.
He's a very dominant force. Mike hadn't quite come into his own as a guitar player yet. And it reminds me a lot of Wind and Weathering in some ways when it comes to textures and sounds.
Oh, absolutely. That's where people want to because Hackett's not on here. I get a feeling that a lot of Genesis fans want to kind of say this isn't, but I really see this as kind of the third, post Gabriel album. Like I kind of look at those three albums as a group. Trick, Wind, and then there were three.
I can see that. Yeah.
So life changes after this for Genesis. They get Misunderstanding is the big hit.
Yeah. Well, I think that they segued into the 80s better than any of their peers.
Absolutely.
And I think it's because of Phil Collins' songwriting. It came along right at the right time. And he was writing about, people things, people issues, relationships. It wasn't these Elizabethan nursery rhymes put to music. It was, stuff that anybody could identify with. And I think that's why they became mega huge once, he kind of came to the fore. But this
absolutely album, they were still, Tony Banks still a great songwriter, right? And so is Mike Rutherford. I mean, those guys are, the three of them had chemistry.
Right. And this is kind of the last one before the Phil influence started to creep in.
Yeah. Great record.
Yeah. Very underrated.
All right, super groups.
Oh, come on. This is like the greatest late 70s prog album as far as I'm concerned.
Super group.
Everybody says it all peaked by 1974, but this is an example of greatness after that.
Yeah. Alan, Bill, and then John and Eddie. They, super group, super problems. They only got one album out of this group, but Danger Money's a phenomenal record, right?
It's
John
really cool,
Yeah.
And it kind of gives a glimpse of what maybe ELP might have become had they not spent time on Love Beach.
Or imploded.
Right. Just a powerful organ trio, keyboard trio. While this is a 4-piece, and it's very heavily influenced by Alan Holdsworth, which is great. It's some of Alan's best work. I think sometimes Alan's best moments are when he's guesting on somebody else's record.
Yeah.
And this is one of his greatest guest spots, I think.
Fantastic.
Nevermore is such an amazing, underrated tune. Just love that,
Good stuff here. So we're going to throw a Canterbury album in. This is one of my favorite.
That's a very important record. Yes.
Just wonderful. I miss some, we got Hatfield in the North, right? We got another National Health album, but this one, working in a record store, got it the day it came out, and you're like, wow, this is an amazing record. This was a lot of fun. Binoculars is just such a great storytelling, the singing, right? Greaves.
Kind of whimsical. And the Bryden 2-step for amphibians.
Yeah.
I interviewed Dave Stewart about 10 years ago, and I let people from progressive ears send in questions, and one of them was, you wrote a song for reptile or amphibians, and he goes, any chance you'll write a follow-up for reptiles? And he's like, no, man, all kinds of creatures would be queuing up at my window expecting me to write about them.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
So
incredibly humorous guy too, that Dave Stewart. He's not only an undersung progressive rock keyboard master.
The Egg albums, like, holy cow.
Yeah, man.
Talk about Hammond.
There's your Emersons and your Wakemans and all those guys, but Dave Stewart is right up there in his own way, and harmonically, he's probably more sophisticated than all of them. Yeah. The chords you got out of that guy, and the rhythms and the tones and textures were so special.
Interesting thing about him, he actually wrote music. Like, a band would play an album, and for Virgin Publishing, he would actually write the music, notation.
All of them? Okay.
So they could get publishing.
Well, he's got the ear for it. You know, he has an amazing ear. And you know, he's written a number of books. He had a series of educational books called Presenting the Dots, talking about, you know, music, dots on a page. And they're really humorous too. You know, he just has a funny way of describing them that takes a rather dry subject and livens it up.
Yeah,
So
great. And then, you know, he had a number one hit with his partner, Barbara Gaskin, just a few years after this. It's my party and I'll cry if I want to. It's a number one hit in England. So God bless him for getting on top of the
that was my handle at Progressive Ears when people would complain. My party, because you want to. Of course, I basically retired from that. I don't know if anybody even noticed. I didn't really. I don't even think I realized it was happening. But looking back, I realized I haven't really moderated anything in about 5 years.
Doesn't need it.
After 15 years, I need a break. You know, I mean,
Doesn't need it.
no, I think we did a lot of great things, but it's a double-edged sword
Yeah.
offering a music forum on the internet. And I just got tired of trying to teach people not to be assholes to each other.
Yeah.
You know, and Duncan and Cozy do a great job to this day. So
They do. They
it's
definitely
still
do.
kicking. And in some ways, I think it's better now than it ever has been. It's
Mhm.
almost like the nonsense is kind of chilled out and we're just talking about music without all
That's
the
it.
extra BS.
Yeah.
So,
Good
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So Rush, you know, I think Rush is really kind of the amazing, you know, last amazing progressive rock band because, you know, what they actually did is if you really look at this point in time, right? So in 1981, all the progressive rock bands from the 70s were losing their progressiveness. You know, they were shedding that, they were simplifying their music,
No, it's kind of been there, done that at that point, I think, for them.
and they wanted to get hits, right? I mean, you know, at some point you're 30, you got a kid, you got a mortgage, you know, it's like, well, I need a music career. And you already had another generation, right? So, I mean, what happened in the late 70s is you have a new generation arrive, right? And they called it punk and new wave. And, you know, the fans got older too, right? You know, like, I mean, we're probably an exception, but, you know, a lot of people, you got a lot of time for music when you're, 18, 20, going through college, right? High school, college, and all that. And, you know, once you get your first job and you get out there, sometimes you don't. But the point is, the guard changed. And the thing I love about Rush is that, you know, they get more progressive and they sell more records. You know, you know, like you think about some of Lifeson's guitar solos and you're like, that guitar solo is, you know, they're playing that on the radio.
Right. Yeah, it's almost some of them are kind of Holsworth inspired.
Yeah.
You never hear Alan on the radio, so you know, it's
You know,
interesting.
Tom Sawyer, great tune. I mean, this Permanent Waves, you know, they're just two fantastic records, made tons of success for them.
Yeah, I probably would have picked Permanent Waves over this one by a hair, but this is the commercial breakthrough. You know, I remember being in eighth grade and everybody talking about this record. You know, I didn't even know who Rush was before that, but I sure did after this came out. And
Yeah,
I
I mean,
became a fan pretty quickly.
yeah, chart position, number 3 in the UK, number 3 in the US.
And lots of
Huge.
prog on this record. I mean,
Yeah.
YYZ, Get Out of Town. That's one of the coolest prog instrumentals ever. And the Camera
Camera's Eye.
Eye, yeah, man, big 10-minute epic multi-segment. So, you know, it was all here, you know, and then catchy little tunes like Limelight that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, even in their shortness have some breathtaking moments.
Breathtaking. And also keyboards too, right? So, you know, Getty was
Yeah.
playing more and more keyboards now. So, you know,
Yeah,
not quite the synth, you know, like he got kind of synthy in the 80s, but
yeah. I think their ultimate keyboard record is honestly the next one, you know,
Grace Under Pressure.
or Signals.
Signals, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, you know, I think Subdivisions is their ultimate keyboard tune. You
yeah.
know, it's like the perfect, it's catchy and it's synth driven, you know. And after that, they continued that route with like Power Windows and Hold Your Fire, but it was almost like by that point they were using sequencing. Do you have all these little effervescent bursts of stuff
Yeah.
pop out of the mix all over the place? And, you know, that seemed a little much in a way. So, yeah, I don't know, but 80s Rush has aged beautifully for me.
Yeah, me too.
When
Grace Under
when
Pressure
I
was
was
one of
living
my.
through it, I wasn't quite as enamored with it because I was still loving the 70s stuff and just wished they would have continued. But in hindsight, the 80s stuff has aged better than the rest of their catalog combined, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, Grace Under Pressure is one of my favorite albums.
Yeah, and I hope the '90s would be a return to form by getting the guitar up front and getting the keyboards out of the picture. But I don't think their writing was quite as daring by then, so it just never really got back to where I thought it should be. Although Clockwork Angels, I think, is kind of a good summation of everything that had
Mhm.
come down the pike in the last 20 years. So,
Yeah, they kind of switched around producers and stuff, and experimented with a lot of different producers. I think in the late '80s
yeah,
and
and they
'90s. I
brought
don't
a
know
lot
how
of
good that was.
different sides out of them. Peter
Yeah.
Collins had that kind of, you know, one thing going on, and then Rupert Hine, he brought in this kind of adult contemporary, kind of soft around the edges kind of approach for a couple records, and then it
Yeah.
was back to more of a ballsy guitar rip, distorted guitar sound. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, you can't really go wrong. I mean, all their albums have merit, honestly,
All of them.
and there's
Great
a
band.
lot of them.
So these guys get more proggy and they make more success. Well, what happens to the proggy guys?
Well,
They get more pop and they sell tons of records
well,
and they win a Grammy.
this is an important record, and I think for a lot of people, they didn't even know the pedigree of the guys that were in the band. They were just, heat of the moment. It was on MTV all the time. It was just that. It wasn't until after the fact that I became a big prog fan I realized, oh, that's who those guys are. That's who did that. And I could see how some people might be disappointed if they were big fans of those guys in the '70s. But I think this album is just like the perfect kind of blend of pop and prog.
I actually love this album. It's one that, I probably went a decade or two hating it, but it's one that I now kind of, I go back to and I go, wait a minute. You know what? They set out to sell records. They set out, to let's just not make an album for, the same 50,000 King Crimson fans or whatever. Let's make an album that millions of people, and I think this was kind of John Wetton. So I did an interview with him that's on the website, and he really, like, I think a lot went into making this album what it was. And the other thing is he had a great songwriting partnership with Jeff Downes. Those two,
Absolutely.
man, they could write songs.
And Steve Howe had a great relationship with him as well. He really
Yeah.
supported Steve in a way that didn't put Steve on the defensive. Tormato is a good example of, Rick did too early on, Fragile, Close to the Edge. But by the time they got to Tomato, it was like they were sparring partners or something, matching each other note for note. And after that, you get more noodles than a pack of ramen.
And you never had like that producer saying, all right, guys,
That's too much,
like back off.
and that's why Drama was such a refreshing album when Yes put it out. And I was saying that to Jeff. It's just like, you really brought out some of Steve's best playing, and I really feel like this album is the proper follow-up to Drama because of that dynamic between Steve and Jeff. I think Steve's playing is really concise on this record. It's to the point. And I can't say that about every Yes album he's on, before or after.
Yeah. But great, number one album, right, in the US. MTV hit, this really was a great record. So, but kind of after this, I kind of I think this is where the chapter closes, because after this, sure, Yes goes, you think about the big six. Pink Floyd effectively broke up, right? Jethro
Well,
Tull had Under Wraps, their most controversial album, and then they kind of broke up until Farm on the Freeway. They had a hit again, right?
yeah.
Genesis was, Popville, right?
Yeah,
Invisible
they made the
Touch.
transition just fine.
Yeah. Yes had one great album because of Trevor Rabin, right? 90125, number
Yeah.
one hit. But then, they dicked around. I mean, And
They
it
could
took
have
them
gotten
too
more
long to
done.
get Big Generator, and they lost all their momentum.
Yeah, I think so too. It's like, for a band that had an album every 2 years in the 70s, they had basically just three in the 80s. And I almost consider Drama a 70s album that just happened to come out right when the 80s started.
Yeah, I am totally with you on that.
So
Totally
it's
with you.
really just two records in 10 years. It's like, come on, guys. So I think that, yeah, I think there were some internal issues. Although I think Big Generator has its moments, I think it has some epic tendencies that the best Yes music had. Tunes like Shoot High, Aim Low or
Mhm.
Finalize have more of that Yes mojo than anything on 90125, in my opinion. But yeah, I think that's for another episode where we could start about 1980 and go
Definitely.
forward. Yeah. So what's
And
number
so,
67?
you ready?
Discipline. Ah, okay. There you go. I would put
Enter
Discipline.
your favorite here, right? There is no wrong answer. And this album is number one. The chart position is number one in your heart.
There you go.
So
Good
whatever
work.
I missed, if it's Trick of the Tail or you pick the album, Drama, you pick the album. Whatever I missed,
Just with the trajectory you have been going on, I would say King Crimson's Discipline, but we'll save that for a starting point for episode
yeah,
number 2.
yeah,
'Cause,
sounds good.
yeah. Well, Charles, thanks a million. And again, tell everybody where they can get the book at. I highly
Strawberry
suggest
Bricks,
this.
Guide to Progressive Rock, Amazon, print on demand. It's a wonderful, thick, 572 pages, 525 albums.
What did you add? This is the third edition. What did you add that makes it so much more hefty this time around?
Lot more reviews.
Okay.
Lot more reviews. Full
Did you write
index,
all the reviews yourself?
all of them,
Okay.
every word.
A lot of these were ones you had for years that you just kind of put together and decided to print.
Yep,
Okay.
massaged them, fixed all the wrong song titles, proofread like crazy. I had a lot of people help. I got to throw that out there. There's some really great people that took the time um, to help me with yeah, I think you got this fact wrong, or maybe this guy changed this or whatever. So I had a lot of help. So it's kind of peer reviewed.
Alrighty.
But it's all in here. It's a record guide. So, you want to learn about something. Oh, what's this kind of like? You'll figure it out. It's there for you. And again, it's a positive book. It's, it doesn't say this is bad or this is good. It just kind of says, here's where they are. This is where they fit in to this decade, to this era. And it's just, it's a great era of music, one that I love, one that I'm passionate about, and as you are too, Sean. So thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for coming on here. It's good to get a chance to chat with you. I've known you for years. It's
Yep,
nice to actually chat in person. So, yeah,
absolutely.
please come back and we'll take a look
We
at
go forward.
the rest of progressive rock's history, because a lot of great music has been made since 1980.
Absolutely.
Tons.
And you know what? You had the neo proggers just starting as these, as Asia was starting to fade. You had the neo proggers in Britain.
You kind of got your
Whole
first
new generation.
generation. You got your first generation of people that grew up on the 70s and 60s stuff and were like, hey, let's make some music of our own that's kind of like this.
Good stuff.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff there. All righty, well, y'all take care.
Yep.
Let me mention again, Monday, I'm chatting with Trey Gunn, who you may remember was in King Crimson for over 10 years. And we're going to catch up on what he's been doing, because he's been a little out of the limelight for recently. So it's curious to see what he's doing. And we'll also look back on those albums that he made with King Crimson, Thrack, The Construction of Light, and The Power to Believe. And catch up on him working with the Security Project with Jerry Murata and all the Peter Gabriel's old original lineup. And then Wednesday, who am I chatting with Wednesday? Guy Pratt from Pink Floyd.
Guy Pratt, yeah.
Matinee. That's right. And then Friday, one of the brightest stars to emerge from the progressive scene in the past 20 years, Ricard Schlobem of Beardfish and Big Big Train. You got a big, big train. So Yeah, y'all take care and subscribe if you haven't. Go back, go by YouTube. It's /Soul SOAL Night Live.
See you
And
guys.
Strawberry Bricks Guide to Progressive Rock, 3rd edition, Amazon. Get one.
Thanks so
Makes
much,
great
guys.
Christmas
See you,
gift
Sean.
too. All right.
Yeah,
Take
great
care,
Christmas
Charles.
present.
We'll see you.
Take care.
All right. Y'all take care.